I remember this rather clearly, even though I was young. I was on a field trip to a popular public park with my daycare. It wasn't unusual for adults to go to this park by themselves, and it was super decked out. There was a train, vendors, sometimes concerts or clowns, so it wasn't only a playground. Anyway, I was always the awkward kid, so I wasn't playing with the other daycare kids, and instead, I was sitting quietly off to the side, just daydreaming, as I often opted to do. And this made me an easy target since I was just chilling solo. There were others around, and I wasn't completely secluded, but I was just off doing my own thing. So, my mum had talked to me about stranger danger before, but I had it in my head that strangers were scary, so I actually didn't know what a stranger really was at the time. I just knew that they were bad people. And this woman walked up to me with a camera in her hands. She complimented my t-shirt, which had a cat photo on the front, and told me that she worked for a cat magazine and thought that it would be a good model for it. Naturally, I was totally down for the prospect. My daycare teachers and the other kids didn't notice that I was talking to a random woman, and she asked me questions like my address, where my mum works, my mother's phone number, my social security. I couldn't really answer most of her questions because, I was just 4 years old. But it didn't deter her. She got my name and my age and everything I did know I told her when she asked me, and she was super nice, I remember, and after I answered her questions, she took a picture of me. After the picture was taken, she said that she needed to go to her car to grab something. I can't recall what or why I had to go with her, according to her story, but I got up and I just went with her. I remember holding her hand, and she was literally unlocking her van when my daycare teacher came running through the parking lot and screaming at her, like bloody murder screaming, "Get the hell away from her, I'm calling the police. Help, she's kidnapping my kid." The whole 9 yards. The woman seemingly forgot about me at this point because she just hopped back into her car and drove off in a snap, leaving me right behind. I remember that I was actually pretty upset at my daycare teacher because I probably wouldn't be in the cat magazine after she'd scared her off. I was crying, and the daycare lady was consoling me, saying that it was okay, she left, I'm safe, but I was crying because I couldn't be in her magazine. My mum picked me up and took me to the police station where I was asked all about the incident, and they never caught her to my knowledge. I didn't know her name or anything really, so I'm not sure what they were going to get her on, but I remember my mum was irritated because the best that I could do for her description was long brown hair and jeans. And that's my story of how I was almost kidnapped. A few years back, one of my best friends and business partner was and still is a single dad. His ex-wife was in and out of a mental institution for years, and he had sole custody of his 2 kids, a boy 10 and a girl 14. So my friend had to travel to New York to oversee the multimedia setup for the auto show for the Ford display. I was back at the office with the programmers during the day and would stay with the kids each evening. Their house was a new 2-story rental in the Woodlands in Texas, and the development was built in a heavily wooded area just north of Houston. Weird stuff started happening the first night that I was there too. I was watching TV with the kids and the den lights would just go off. The light switch was on the other side of the room as well. I went over and the switch was turned off. At first, I thought it was a problem with a breaker or something, or there was another light switch, but if there was another light switch, then who turned it off? I flipped the switch back on though, and the lights came back on, and I went back to sit down. The lights went off again though, and I walked back and I found that the switch was flipped back down to off. And that actually disturbed me a bit. This went on for a while too, and I asked the kids if this had happened before, and they told me every now and then that the lights would just go off. So, and now I'm trying to act unconcerned in front of the kids, and suddenly there was a loud crash in the attic, and we went upstairs and opened the attic door to check, and there was nothing in the attic. It was completely empty, and there was just no explanation for what made the loud noise. I'm thinking that There must be somebody else in the house at this point. I mean, their mother had showed up unexpectedly before at their old house, but she was in jail at the time and supposedly didn't even have their address. But things quieted down though, and it was eventually time to go to bed. I let the family dog in, a lab, checked all the doors and made sure that they were all locked, and then went up to the guest room, which was between the kids' bedrooms. I had just turned the bedside lamp off and I was laying down when I saw the silhouette of a boy crouched down between the cable box or the VCR lights on the other side of the room and myself. I thought at first that the sun was getting ready to try and scare me, so I turned the bedside lamp on and said gotcha, but there was no one there. And then there was another loud crash in the attic. This woke the kids up too, and now they were pretty scared. And then we heard a door slam downstairs. I told them that it was a new house and noises happened, and I also told them that I would sleep in the day bed out in the hallway, and I made my rounds again and we all went back to bed. When I woke up the next morning, the kids and the dog were all asleep on the floor next to my bed. And I still have more than 4 nights to go. So this is an experience that I had 2 months ago while I was visiting my grandmother. I was outside around a couple of metal containers to sort of throw away garbage. The containers are placed around a tall hedge and it's really dark outside. Now, the hedge made it so that the space around the containers were even darker than the surrounding area. The containers are also placed so that there's not a lot of space between them, and so it's a bit hard to explain, but it was crammed and made it difficult to visibly see the entire space at one given time, even with lighting. Because of the darkness, I turn on my phone torch and start dumping trash into the containers. One of the containers that takes plastic was completely full, so I still tried to fit as much as I could in it, but it was getting a bit difficult. Because it was so full, in fact, a lid from a plastic container dropped to the ground and rolled to the edge of the container. I bent down to pick it up, and then I thought that I heard what I can only describe as an animal-like low growl or hiss. The sound was so audibly low that I first thought that I must have imagined it. I shone my torch around the corner of the container, expecting to see an animal like a raccoon or a stray cat. Yet, there was absolutely nothing there. Not a pair of reflecting eyes or anything. I shook the feeling off eventually and just continued loading trash into the container. This continued for another half-minute, I think, until I heard what I can only describe as an animal-like scream coming from somewhere very close to me. The sound filled me with so much dread that, with shaking hands, I just packed up my things and left, not looking back. On my way back, I thought that I heard footsteps behind me, but when I stopped and listened, the sound also slowed to a stop. Though it kept going for a good half a second each time that I stopped walking and only resumed when I started walking again. I kept looking over my shoulder, but I didn't see anyone or anything there. Since then, I've been Googling around for sounds that may sound similar to what I heard, and I haven't found anything yet that comes close to it. It kind of sounded like an animal, but not like an animal too that I've heard before. It didn't sound like a typical cat or dog or anything like that, and looking back, I don't know why I had such an emotional reaction to the experience. The level of dread that it instilled in me is something I haven't experienced before, and this encounter just left me shaking for hours. It's definitely amongst the most terrifying experiences that I've ever had anyway. But what really freaks me out, though, is that I didn't see anything at all. The encounter could have been explained by some animal, but there was never anything there when I tried to look. Also, the footstep phenomenon is something I've encountered before while going to the store, and it seems to only happen around a very specific stretch of road very close to those containers, too. To this day, I still don't know what I heard that day, but it shook me up for a long time. When I was 9, I went to my friend Casey's birthday party. Casey lived near my grandparents, and her family had horses and owned a barn that was about a 10-minute walk from my grandparents. My parents dropped me and my little brother off at my grandparents'. He was staying there while I was at the party, and afterwards we would both stay the night at my grandparents'. I remember this night very clearly too. I remember being excited because it was the first party that I went to without my parents. Casey's party is in the barn and the horses are outside in the fenced-up area. There's music and decorations, balloons tied to basically everything, and tables with food and gifts, and there's a lot of other kids there, but none I really know except for Casey and her older sister. Since I didn't really know anyone, and Casey was too busy to hang out with me much, I felt left out, and after a little while of just standing around awkwardly, I decided I was ready to leave. It's dark out, and it's way out in the country, so there are no streetlights or anything. I make it less than halfway to my grandparents before I get scared and I turn back to ask if someone will walk with me. I'd only been gone for a few minutes, mind you, but when I got back, everything was just different. There were no kids, no decorations, no food or music, just a dark, empty barn. Terrified, I run all the way back to my grandparents as fast as I can, and once I get there, my grandma is furious with me for being outside. I tried to explain to her how everyone at the party had disappeared, and she had no idea what I was talking about. But there was a party. She told me that we were staying at her house so that my parents could have a date night, and I even asked Casey and her sister about it the next day, and they had no idea what I was talking about. Casey says that her birthday isn't actually for a few weeks. To this day, my family says I must have been sleepwalking and just dreamed the whole thing, but I can't accept that. I mean, it felt real. I remember it too clearly. There's just no way that it was just a dream. So basically, I went to a party that never actually happened. My wife and I live in a 2-story townhouse, and our bedroom is upstairs. Just inside the bedroom door and to the left stands an old full-length freestanding mirror. The frame is made of oak, and I was given the mirror over 20 years ago now when a friend cleaned out his house. Our bed is in the middle of the room, with the mirror being just across the floor from my side. Now, one of our dogs sleeps in the bed with us. She's been around the mirror since birth and has never had any issues with it. But at 2:40 this morning, I awoke to her growling and just staring at the mirror, head and ears up. I reached down and tapped her butt and just told her to stop, but she remained rigid, but lowered her head a bit and continued staring directly into the mirror. Within a minute, she began growling again, and then very slowly advancing toward the mirror on her belly, with her growls now ending in barks. At the time, 1,000 things were running through my mind, like, is it an intruder, something worse? But the growling and the barks just became louder and louder until she stood up, stepped down off the bed and walked cautiously over to the mirror, about 3 or 4 feet from it, and then laid down on her stomach with her front legs extended and her head pointing directly toward the mirror. She remained in that position, growling with the occasional bark as I was getting out of bed, and I immediately turned on the lights and everything seemed okay. I noted the time was now 3:01 a.m. and she followed me downstairs, and she didn't want food or water or potty and not even a treat. So we eventually just walked back upstairs, and the time was now 10 after 3. She watched as I checked out the mirror, and I tilted it, shook it, viewed it from her angle, and there was nothing. And she seemed okay now. So I turned off the lights and I got back under the covers, and she hopped back onto the bed in her usual spot, pointed toward the mirror, and I stayed awake for about 20-ish minutes just listening to the sounds of the house at the night, and the rest of the night was uneventful. But when I woke up this morning and I went downstairs to get a coffee, I noticed that both of the laundry room doors, they were wide open. And I know for a fact that those doors, they were closed at 3 a.m. So I have lots of creepy encounters during my travels, but I'll start with the most recent one. So this is fairly long, as I had two creepy encounters, one right after the other. For clarification too, I'm Asian with distinct Asian features, 5 foot 1 inch small, and I'm in my 20s. So last year, I went to Egypt with a big group of 40. For one night we stayed at this beautiful villa-style hotel on the top of the mountains too. The layout for this particular hotel is that there's a very long pool in the middle surrounded by small villas with about 20 rooms per villa, I think. Our group got assigned to the farthest villa from the lobby. It was around 10 p.m. too, and I decided to go out for a walk to watch the stars and all that. My grandma, who I was sharing the room with, was tired and went to sleep early, so I went out by myself. I walked around the pool and enjoyed the weather and the stars, and I sat on one of the benches by the poolside. And it was then that I noticed one of the hotel staff, a bag porter who helped with our luggages when we checked in, was approaching me. I didn't think anything of it, but he came by and made small conversation. I brushed it off as he was just trying to be friendly and courteous to guests. He asked questions like where we came from, and I answered politely. But what he said next, it gave me the creeps. So, he said that his friend was actually looking for a wife from my country, and I was like, okay dude. But I laughed it off and lied that I was married. He asked where my husband was, and I kind of panicked and told him my non-existent husband got left behind because he had work. He took out his phone and called someone, but I guess the person he was calling just wasn't picking up. He told me to wait, but my spidey senses were tingling on overdrive at this point, and I had two options. To walk back to the villa as quickly as possible, but risk letting this man know the room where I'm staying at with my grandma, or walk towards the well-lighted lobby, hoping that there are people from my group still there. I stood up and I decided to start walking fast to the lobby. The man was still trying to call someone on his phone and tried to call after me, but I waved goodbye hurriedly. When I got to the lobby, I was relieved to see our tour leader, our Egyptian tour guide, and probably 3 ladies from our group still there. And no more creepy hotel staff, or so I thought. In the hotel lobby, they have a bunch of these souvenir shops set up, and one of the ladies I was close with, B, was browsing inside the papyrus souvenir shop. Our guide warned us beforehand that the papyrus painting that they sell at this hotel, it's definitely fake, or just generally low-quality tourist trap souvenirs. So I went into the shop to tell B about that, in case she forgot. Inside the shop was B, me, and 2 salesmen. One of them was standing near the door and blocking the only means of exit. B asked for my opinion between 2 paintings, and the salesman standing in front of us told us that these paintings have a different pattern shown up that glows in the dark. He asked us if we wanted to see it, and I firmly said no before B could answer, and I had enough for the day, and I just wanted to go back to our room. However, this persistent salesman said something to this other man standing behind us, who then proceeded to close the door and the light switch. And oh boy, was that creepy. Maybe I'm just paranoid, but I don't like the idea of being in a pitch-dark room with 2 men that I do not know. I could also sense that B was starting to panic, and she held onto my wrist. And, like an angel in disguise, the door suddenly opened from outside, and it was B's aunt, who was also in the lobby with our tour guide, who shouted at us and asked what we were doing. She motioned for us to come quickly, and I swear that I do not know what would have happened if B's aunt didn't open the door at that time. She made a fuss over it, and the rest of the group walked back to the villa together with our tour leader, and on the way to the villa, B's aunt asked us if anything happened, and if our phones and wallets were still with us and all that. We checked our belongings, and everything seemed fine, and no one followed us back to the villa, and I was so happy that we were also checking out the next morning. Perhaps the creepiest thing, though, was that when the light flooded the room after my friend's aunt came in, those 2 men who were in the room, they seemed to be approaching us slowly. Like, they were a fair distance away when the light was turned off, but by the time that the door was opened, they were much closer to us. I don't know if the other guy with the phone had anything to do with this, but the whole thing was just eerily coincidental and really creepy. In Emigrant, Montana, a village-sized town that has roughly 500 people, resides a large ranch house with a main floor, attic, remodeled into a bathroom, and a really ancient basement. It's located just before the Mill Creek Bridge that crosses the Yellowstone River, and it's really large with acres of land. So my grandma and grandpa raised my dad and her sister, Aunt Elle, and their half-sister there. It was built in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and because it was a massive property with a barn, a separate garage, multiple chicken coops, and fields for livestock or crops, and naturally a few ranch hands had died on the property before they moved in. For an idea of what the house looks like, there's a large main floor consisting of 2 bathrooms, 4 bedrooms, a laundry room, and a huge kitchen. Up the staircase, which is down a lengthy hall from the living room, led up to only one room. I think it used to be an ordinary attic back in the day or something, but when my dad grew up there, it had already been remodeled into a bedroom, and this was my Aunt Elle's bedroom. I've talked to Aunt Elle before about her bad experiences in the house, most occurring in her solitary attic, as she called it. She told me that she had suffered from just terrible screaming night terrors often, and even as a teenager, refused to sleep up there and instead slept on a mattress in the living room with my grandma. She once described one of her night terrors to me too, and in a dream, she was being pinned to a bed in the attic, unable to move, surrounded by numerous human-like figures in red robes. To me, this sounded a lot like sleep paralysis, but she was thrashing around and screaming in her sleep, so it mustn't have been. Aunt Elle was pretty scared after that experience too, and my grandma bought a small crucifix for her to wear as a necklace. They were somewhat religious and Catholic and attended a local church, but usually just my Aunt Elle and grandma would go. The rest of my family didn't seem to care about religion, but while wearing the crucifix, she found that the night terrors just stopped, even when sleeping in a haunted room. She said that it actually made a huge difference and that she was finally able to feel almost safe in her room again and everything was better. Now, Aunt Elle doesn't know how, but she actually misplaced the necklace a few years later, and almost immediately, the terrible dreams and restless nights came back. It became so bad, in fact, that apparently they had an exorcism, even though that might not be the correct term because only certain priests are licensed by the Vatican to perform real exorcisms, I guess, but I'd call this a Montana village version of an exorcism. My grandma called on the members of the church, asking for help after she became just increasingly concerned with Aunt Elle's behavior, among the other strange happenings around the house and property, like cupboards opening, objects moving, strange noises, etc. Many church members came to the house, including the pastor, and some drove from hours away to participate. They all stood in a circle in the living room and held hands, praying and attempting to rid the house of whatever was haunting it and my family. Aunt Elle says that some people actually even began speaking in tongues. I find that part hard to believe personally, but I love and trust my aunt, and I'd like to believe it happened. But anyway, even with sage burning, crucifixes hung up over doors, and a group of devout Catholics holding hands and chanting, these demonic spirits just never left the house. The Montana-made exorcism had failed, and there wasn't much my grandma could do, and they were not about to leave the house anytime soon, so they just tried to live with it. Not long after the exorcism of the house, though, my Aunt Elle remembered her old crucifix working for her and soon bought another one, almost identical to the first one that she wore. And once again, the hauntings and the odd sleep behaviors calmed down until they eventually grew up and moved out. The house was kept in the family, though, but everyone went their separate ways, and they might have rented the place out for a while or something, through the late 80s and 90s, but I'm not completely sure. Fast forward about 15 years, right before I was born, my dad, mum, and older brother, who was only 1 at the time, got permission from the family to rent the house and moved in to run their horse and glass etching business from home. It was also a beautiful spot to raise kids, right on the Yellowstone, with just so much to entertain us. I was born in 1998 and lived in that house for about 6 years, I think. I only have memories, though, from ages of about 4 to 6 in that house, I think, and my brother was 6 to 8 and has even better memories. And my parents told us countless stories after we had moved out and grew older too, and We all remembered just how creepy it felt living there, and we all agreed that it was definitely haunted. Once I was no longer in my crib, I got my own bed and room, and my room was next to the kitchen, but my brother's was really far away on the other end of the house. I hated the way my room felt, so I played in my brother's room a lot, and the main floor was honestly massive and really stretched out, like a maze almost, especially for a 5-year-old. My parents took the attic room for privacy, and my dad told me that shortly after moving in, and while I was too young to know what was happening, the night terrors began. My mum was sleeping in the living room on a futon alone at first most nights, which wasn't out of the ordinary because my dad would snore really loud and she just can't sleep through it. She later admitted, though, that she just couldn't stand the vibe coming from that room anyways. My brother and I always had nightmares, and I especially had terrifying ones about the house itself that I'll never forget. So, we rarely slept in our rooms, which is normal for kids that age, and eventually it got to the point where every night we just slept by our mum on the futon. Our own rooms gave us the creeps, and our parents knew it too, and never once questioned it. I know my brother and I were not scared to sleep alone, just scared to sleep alone in that house. The whole property just gave off a really creepy feeling, but we felt safe together. My dad did sleep alone, though, in the same attic where his sister experienced a repetitive demonic presence 20 years prior. I know he remembers living in the house as a kid, so I'll never understand why he stayed in that room. Most nights, too, he would get these night terrors and scream so loud that we could hear it downstairs, down the hall, and in the living room. I could tell it scared my mum, too, although she handled it well, and he would scream bloody murder until my mum would go to the attic to wake him up. And this became a routine thing, but never once got less freaky. He actually suffered from extreme insomnia at this house, being too scared to fall asleep eventually, or just couldn't sleep at all, and I remember my dad looking like a zombie to me during this time, probably from being so restless and working a lot too. He didn't take on to the whole religion thing as a kid, and never turned to the church for help or anything. But talking to him later on, however, he admits that it was very haunted. His night terrors usually involved my brother, mum, or myself getting murdered, and he spared me the details most of the time and did never feel comfortable talking about his terrors. And I could tell that it scared him, though. My mum, who was an atheist, although was raised Catholic, had her sandblasting machine set up in the creaky, leaky basement that had stairs down from the kitchen, and a cellar door outside leading to it as well. The concrete staircase spiraled down and was actually pretty steep. The basement itself was riddled with mice, and I think we even found a feral cat with babies down there at some stage. It honestly looked like an old damn torture chamber with just terrible lighting and mold everywhere. My mother spent countless hours in that basement too, putting designs into glassware and tiles to sell so that she could help my dad support us. She told me that she always had a terrible feeling being down there alone and hated working in the dim light. Often she would open the cellar door to let light in, but she hardly let my brother or I keep her company while she was working there. Around 2004, we moved out, and the family sold the whole riverfront property for roughly $1 million to some rich guy who wanted to rent the rooms out for fishermen. Last I checked, though, it has been sold or rented out to some hippie who raises goats or something. I drove by it last week, and you can see through the giant glass windows that she has the rooms illuminated with red lights for some reason. My mum also began having sleep paralysis at that house, but doesn't get into it much anymore. My parents divorced in 2014, and she's now engaged to someone else, about to be happily married this March too. My dad's night terrors continued for years after we moved too, but eventually they stopped, and his insomnia just never went away. And he was restless until the day that he passed away, and it was last weekend at the young age of 50. Now, since I was maybe 5, I've been having these routine nightmares, crazy lucid dreams, and just constant sleep paralysis, even though I live away from my family now. And in my own apartment, I've had a handful of pretty terrifying paranormal experiences with my boyfriend. Well, my brother is actually 23 now and takes care of my grandma in the apartment my dad died in, and he hasn't had nightmares like he used to, I think. We don't talk about that much anymore because we're both just busy people. My cousin, Aunt Elle's daughter, recently told me, though, that she also suffers from sleep paralysis and oddly frightening dreams, although she never lived in the ranch house. They did come visit a lot, though, when we lived there, so I guess there's that. We're both 20 years old now, and we don't talk either much nowadays, but we always felt a stronger relationship than the other cousins did because we look pretty much identical and sound alike. It's currently 5:20 a.m. at this point, and I'm telling this story because my Aunt Elle called me about an hour ago, and this was just really out of character for her because she has a normal 9 to 5 job and thus a normal sleep schedule. She doesn't work tomorrow, but it's still a little bit strange. Anyway, she called me to tell me that she actually found her original crucifix, which she wore when she had almost lost it 30 years ago in that house. She gave it to her daughter and told her to wear it, as Jesus is supposed to protect you from demonic presences, she said, and she also decided to give me her second crucifix, hoping it might protect me from whatever invisible presence might be around me. To be honest, I plan on never taking it off, as she really wants me to have it too. Please understand that I know millions of people experience sleep paralysis and nightmares every day, and they aren't demonic or spiritual, and even though they feel that way, the scientists can somewhat logically explain why these things happen to us in our sleep with science. However, I don't feel like my family's experiences can be explained completely that way. I was raised without a god to pray to, and I've never been religious, in fact, doubting the presence of a higher power altogether. I know that this was a pretty long story, but everything that I recall myself and was told by my Aunt Elle, my dad, my mum and my brother and my grandma is true. I didn't make any of this up, and I did not exaggerate any details intentionally. Keep in mind, too, that I was very young when I lived there, and I totally admit that it's possible my young mind interpreted some events as scarier or different than they actually were. But my dad's night terrors were really scary, no matter what age I was. Funnily enough, though, I kind of miss that house. I mean, I had my first memories there, with plenty of amazing ones to help weigh out the scary ones. Anyway, I never thought that I would share this story here, but I just had to share it with someone, so I hope you guys enjoyed it.